Okay, let's dive straight into this explainer and deconstruct how an orphaned outcast on the harsh Mongolian steppe somehow managed to forge the largest contiguous land empire in human history. You hear Genghis Khan, and you probably immediately picture a ruthless warlord sweeping across the plains, right? But the true story of how he built this sprawling, incredibly sophisticated empire that literally altered the course of civilization, well, it's a lot more complex than just brute force. Let's dig into the historical records and see exactly how this total outsider pulled it off.
Now, check out this massive number, 16 million. What's wild here is that this isn't a death toll, and it's not the size of his army. It actually represents the 16 million men alive today. That's roughly 1 in every 200 globally, who carry Genghis Khan's exact genetic legacy. Crazy, right? Through genetic studies, we can literally see his enduring footprint on the human race. But to figure out how one guy's bloodline could spread that widely, we have to go back to the very beginning, way before he had an empire.
Which brings us to the rise of the outcast. To understand how he conquered the world, you really have to look at the absolute crucible of his youth, because he absolutely was not born with an empire at his feet. Actually, by the time he was just 9 years old, his father was poisoned by a rival tribe. His own people then just completely abandoned him, his mother and his siblings. They were forced to survive on wild roots and rodents in this totally unforgiving world of violently fractured nomadic tribes. He was even captured and enslaved by the very clan that rejected him, before eventually making a daring escape. And if all that wasn't enough, shortly after he married his wife Borte, she was kidnapped by a rival tribe, forcing him to scrape together an early alliance just to rescue her. Basically, he learned very early on that relying on traditional tribal nobility was literally a death sentence.
Those incredibly harsh beginnings stripped away all the ancient customs he grew up around and forged this radical new philosophy. A warrior does not win a battle by virtue of his birth. He realized, probably out of pure survival instinct, that a person's worth had absolutely nothing to do with who their father was. It was all about what they could actually do on the battlefield. So he learned to value extreme loyalty, intense discipline, and sheer capability over aristocratic bloodlines. And you know, this simple but radical idea was going to change everything.
So let's look at how that shaped the legendary Mongol war machine.
Once he united those fractured Mongol tribes in 1206, he needed to transform them from a loose band of nomads into a highly coordinated military force. And to do that, he demanded incredibly strict discipline. He required every single cavalryman to carry a highly specific, mandatory kit. We're talking a wood and bone bow with an unbelievable 500-yard range, plus inflatable, waterproof saddlebags that actually served as life preservers for rapid river crossings. But I want you to notice that last mandatory item, a silk shirt. This is a brilliant piece of tactical armor. See, if an enemy arrow penetrated the soldier's body, the silk wouldn't tear. Instead, it would be pushed into the wound with the arrowhead, allowing the soldier to safely pull the embedded arrow out just by gently tugging the silk. That is a level of tactical preparation that was completely unmatched at the time.
But Genghis Khan didn't just rely on brute force and advanced gear. He totally mastered psychological warfare too, specifically through a brilliantly calculated 4-step confusion tactic. Just picture this. Before a battle, every man lights 5 fires, making the camp look like it has more soldiers than stars in the sky. This would completely paralyze enemy scouts with fear. Then, his troops advance in terrifying absolute silence, only to suddenly unleash a storm of arrows and a merciless charge. Finally, they'd fake a retreat. They'd draw the enemy out into a disorganized chase before suddenly turning around and annihilating them in a deadly ambush. It was just incredibly calculated.
But of course, he wasn't just a general. He was essentially the CEO of the steppe.
Because conquering is really only half the story. You can win a battle, sure, but holding on to that territory, that's a whole different challenge. He managed this by completely flipping the aristocratic status quo. Under the traditional Mongol way, power was inherited, and defeated tribes were usually just wiped out. But Genghis Khan implemented a strict meritocracy. He put competent allies in key positions totally regardless of their background. And rather than slaughtering every defeated soldier, he took the conquered tribes under his protection. He swelled his ranks by integrating the very men he had just defeated right into his own army. Talk about a massive paradigm shift.
Yet, we really have to acknowledge his terrifying ruthlessness here. He was strategic, absolutely, but when provoked, his retaliation was basically apocalyptic. The historical sources detail how he originally tried to establish peaceful trade with the Khwarezmian Empire in Persia, but their leader arrogantly executed the Mongol diplomats. Well, Genghis Khan was absolutely furious. He sent a force of 200,000 soldiers and quite literally erased the Khwarezmian Empire from history. It was during this unprecedented, staggering bloodshed that he delivered this chilling quote, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you. So how exactly do you govern the millions of people you don't destroy? To maintain order among all those nomads, he implemented what was called the Yassa. This strict legal code reveals a really surprising duality about him. Alongside his brutal conquests, he created a shockingly progressive system. It outright banned the enslavement of any Mongol, it strictly prohibited the kind of petty blood feuds that had ruined his own childhood, and get this, it actually mandated religious tolerance. He allowed his wildly diverse subjects to practice their faiths freely, whether they were Muslim, Christian, or Buddhist.
Furthermore, to keep everything connected, he established the Yam. This was a sprawling, high-speed communication network of relay stations stocked with food, shelter, and fresh horses. It allowed official messengers to travel up to 125 miles in a single day. Think about that. This meant his empire could coordinate military logistics and political developments with incredible speed and accuracy across thousands of miles. It was essentially a 13th century Pony Express, and it let his empire move faster than anything the world had ever seen.
And that speed was absolutely essential for forging a true global empire.
Utilizing this highly disciplined army and incredibly effective administrative network, the sheer scale of his conquests is almost hard to comprehend. I mean, we constantly hear about the might of the Roman Empire, right? Well, that covered about 5 million square miles at its peak, but Genghis Khan and his successors conquered an empire that was more than double that size. It eventually encompassed an astonishing 11 to 12 million contiguous square miles, stretching all the way from the Pacific Ocean straight to Eastern Europe.
This rapid expansion was nothing short of an absolute blitzkrieg. From uniting the tribes in 1206 to shattering the Jin dynasty in China just 5 years later, to obliterating those empires in Persia by 1219, and eventually his descendants crushing European knights in Poland and Hungary in the 1230s and 40s, they just moved like an unstoppable storm, striking with a speed and precision the world literally had never seen before.
Which leads us to his enduring and perhaps unexpected legacy.
So, what happened after the great conqueror fell? Genghis Khan died mysteriously in 1227 at the age of 65. The sources note that the exact cause is heavily debated. It was possibly from internal injuries after a fall from his horse, or maybe an illness like malaria, or even an infected arrow wound. Whatever it was, without him, the empire simply became too large for anyone to rule. It permanently fractured into 4 separate warring khanates ruled by his descendants, including the famous Golden Horde in Russia and the Yuan dynasty in China.
However, his consolidation of the East and West under one cohesive political system had a truly monumental side effect. It completely protected the Silk Road. By bringing all these major trade centers under Mongol control, he enforced strict laws to protect merchants, essentially creating the first truly global economy. It's really the ancient precursor to the modern global supply chains we rely on today, allowing goods, technologies, ideas, and cultures to mix and spread faster than ever before in human history.
So, knowing what you know now about his intensely meritocratic laws, his revolutionary communication networks, and yes, his incredibly brutal conquests that literally wiped entire civilizations off the map, I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. Was Genghis Khan simply a ruthless barbarian, or does the evidence show he was an undeniable architect of the modern world? It's a hugely complex legacy, and one that absolutely deserves our attention. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history you think you know.